Hi, Super Relaxed Fantasy Club. My name is Andrea Stewart, and I am the author of The Bone Shard Daughter, which is the first in the Drowning Empire trilogy. This is the book, and it is my debut, and it's not out yet. It's coming out in September 8th for the US, and then September 10th for the UK. So I am very excited. Like a lot of you, I've been stuck at home for the past, I think it's been a couple months now. So one of the things that I've been doing is some reading. So I kind of just wanted to share a few of the books that I've been reading recently, and then do a reading from my book. So one of the books I've read recently is The Wolf of Oren by K.S. Veloso. So this book is also another epic fantasy. Love epic fantasy. This came out in February. I was lucky enough to get an advance copy, which I just tore through. It's told in first person. The main character is known as the Bitch Queen. And it starts out with a bang and basically just goes nonstop from there. There are dragons in it. One of the things I really loved about it was the main character, who has a really interesting past that kind of interweaves with like why she's acting the way she does and why she makes the decisions that she does. So it's kind of this unraveling throughout the whole story. So I really enjoyed that one. Another book that I read recently is Mazes of Power by Juliet Wade. This also came out fairly recently. I think maybe it was April. Anyways, so this is actually not fantasy. Technically, it's sociological science fiction, but it does take place in an underground city. There's a lot of political machinations going on and a lot of commentary on their kind of uniquely structured society, and which is very stratified. So that was really good. I really enjoyed that. I can't wait for the next one. And then I've also been in the middle of this book, which is The Vanished Queen by Elizabeth Campbell. This is actually not out yet. This comes out in August, which is not that far away. You can see I'm like about halfway through that, but really enjoying it so far. It's got some elements in common with my book, which is it also has this revolution brewing in the background, although it's more in the foreground for this one. And then characters are trying to decide, you know, where their loyalties lie, who they can trust, how they should go about bringing down this regime. So far I've really been enjoying that. It's very beautifully written. So for my book, it's epic fantasy. It's set on an archipelago of islands. I always like books that are set on archipelagos, so I wanted to do that for my book. It follows four main characters. So there's, well, five, I guess. So there's a daughter who is trying to reclaim her place as heir. There's a smuggler who professes not to care but can't stop doing good things. And then there's two women in an established relationship who are struggling with class differences and how that relates to their support or a non-support of the brewing revolution. And there's a stranger on this remote island who is trying to unravel the mystery of why she's there, and how she got there. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and read a little bit from my forthcoming book. The first chapter is actually already available online on IO9. So the full first chapter is up on the internet. So I wanted to just go ahead and read a little bit from chapter 2. So this is from the viewpoint of Jovis. He is the smuggler that I mentioned before. This is first person. I've been told you're not supposed to do a reading from first person if the person is a different gender than you, because it's confusing. So just, you know, use your imagination. I'm sure you all have very good imaginations, and pretend that I'm a man for this reading. Okay. Chapter 2, Jovis, Deerhead Island. I hoped this was one of my smaller mistakes. I tugged at the hem of the jacket. The sleeves were too short, the waist too roomy, the shoulders just a bit too broad. I sniffed the collar. The musky star anise perfume went straight up my nose, making me cough. If you're trying to attract a partner with that, best try a little less, I said. It was a good piece of advice, but the soldier at my feet didn't respond. Is it still talking to oneself if the other person is unconscious? Well, the uniform fit enough, and enough is what I could hope for most days. I had 2 full standard boxes of Whitstone on my boat. Enough to pay my debts, enough to eat well for 3 months, enough to get my boat from one end of the Phoenix Empire to the other. But enough would never get me what I truly needed. I'd heard a rumor at the docks, a whisper of a disappearance similar to my Amala's, and I'd be cursing myself the rest of my life if I didn't suss out the origins. I slipped from the alleyway, resisting the urge to tug at the jacket hem one more time. Nodded to another soldier when I passed her in the street. Let out my breath when she nodded back and turned away. I'd not checked the yearly tithing festival schedule before stopping, and because luck rarely worked out in my favor, this meant, of course, the festival was here. Deerhead Island was swarming with Emperor's soldiers, and here I was, a trader without an imperial contract, who'd had more than one run-in with Empire's soldiers. I held the edge of my sleeve in my fingers as I navigated the streets. I'd gotten the rabbit tattoo when I'd passed the navigational exams. It was less pride and more practicality. How else would they identify my swollen and bloated body if I washed ashore? But now, as a smuggler, the tattoo was a liability. That and my face. They'd gotten the jawline wrong on the posters. The eyes were too close together, and I'd cut my curling hair short since then. But it was a likeness. I'd been paying gutter orphans to take them down, but then 5 days later I'd see some damned construct putting another one back up. It was a shame that imperial uniforms didn't come with hats. I should have taken my Whitstone and fled, but Amala was a string in my heart that fate couldn't seem to stop tugging. So I set my feet one in front of one another and did my best to appear as bland and blank as possible. The man at the docks had said the disappearance was recent, so the trail was still fresh. I didn't have much time. The soldier hadn't seen me before I clobbered him, but he'd patched a section of the left elbow and he'd recognized his uniform. The street narrowed ahead, sunlight filtering down through gaps between the buildings and laundry hung to dry. Someone inside called out, "Don't keep me waiting. How long does it take to put on a pair of shoes?" I wasn't far from the ocean, so the air still smelled like seaweed, mingled with cooking meat and hot oil. They'd be preparing their children for the festival, and preparing the festival meal for when their children returned. Good food couldn't heal wounds of body and soul, but it could soothe them. My mother had prepared a feast for my tray panning day. Roasted duck with crisped skin, grilled vegetables, fragrant and spiced rice, fish with the sauce still bubbling. I'd had to dry my tears before eating it. But that was a long time past for me. The scar behind my right ear long since healed. I ducked beneath the shirt hung too low and still damp, and found the drinking hall the man at the docks had described. The door creaked as I opened it, scraping a well-worn path along the wooden floorboards. This early in the morning, it should have been empty. Instead, imperial guards lurked in dusty corners, dried fish hanging from the ceiling. I made my way to the back, my shoulder against the wall, my wrist hidden by my thigh, my head down. If I'd been a better planner, I'd have wrapped the tattoo. Ah well. My face was the bigger problem, and I couldn't wrap that. A woman stood behind the counter, her broad back to me, hair tied up in a handkerchief with a few loose strands stuck to her neck. She hunched over a wooden cutting board, her fingers nimbly pleating dumplings. "Auntie," I said to her, deferential. She didn't turn around. "Don't call me that," she said. "I'm not old enough to be anyone's auntie except to children." She wiped her floured hands on her apron, sighed. "What can I get for you?" "I wanted to talk," I said. She turned around then and gave my uniform a long look. I don't think she even glanced at my face. I sent my nephew along to the square already. The census takers would have marked him by now. "Is that what you're here for?" "You're Danila, right?" "I have questions about your foster daughter," I said. Her face closed up. I reported everything I know. I knew the reception she'd received upon her report because Amala's parents had gotten the same. The shrugged shoulders, the annoyed expressions. Young women ran away sometimes, didn't they? And besides, what did they expect the Emperor to do about it? "Just leave me in peace," she said before turning back to her dumplings. That soldier in the alleyway might be waking up right now with a splitting headache and a good many questions on his lips. But Amala. Her name chased itself around my head, spurring me to action. I slid around the end of the counter and joined Daniela at the cutting board. Without waiting for any sort of approval, I picked up the wrappings and the filling and began to pleat. After a startled moment, she began again. Behind us, 2 soldiers bet on their game of cards. You're good, she begrudged me. Very neat, very quick. My mother. She is a cook. I shook my head with a rueful smile. It had been so long since I'd been home. Another life, almost. Makes the best dumplings in all the Isles. I ran about a lot, sailing and studying for the navigational exams, but I always liked to help her, even after I passed. If you passed the navigational exams, why are you a soldier? I weighed my options. I was a good liar. The best. It was the only reason I still had a head on my shoulders. But this woman reminded me of my mother, gruff but kind-hearted. And I had a missing wife to find. I'm not. I slid my sleeve up enough to show the rabbit tattoo. Daniela looked at the tattoo and then at my face. Her eyes narrowed, then widened. Jovis, she said in a whisper, you're that smuggler. I'd prefer most successful smuggler in the last 100 years, but I'll settle for that smuggler. She snorted. Depends on how you define success. Your mother wouldn't think so, I'd guess. You're probably right, I said lightly. It would deeply pain her to know how far I'd fallen. Daniela relaxed, her shoulder now touching mine, her expression softer. She wouldn't give me away. Just wasn't the sort. I need to ask about your foster daughter, how she disappeared. There isn't much to tell, she said. She was here one day and then gone the next. 19 silver coins left on her bedspread, as though a silver phoenix was all a year of her life was worth. It was 2 days ago. I keep thinking she'll walk back in the door. She wouldn't. I knew because I'd thought the same for a year. I could still see the 19 silver coins scattered across Amala's bed, could still feel my heart pounding, my stomach twisting, caught in that moment of both knowing she was gone and not being able to believe it. So she was a bright young woman, Daniela said, a quaver in her voice. She struck the tears from her eyes before they could reach her cheeks. Her mother died in a mining accident and she didn't know her father. I never married, never had any children of my own. I took her in. I needed someone to help. The word thudded from my mouth. I couldn't form the question. Daniela picked up another wrap and studied my face. I may not be old enough to be your auntie, but to me, you are still a boy. If the Empire had anything to do with her disappearance, she's already dead. I have never been in love. We never met as children. We never became friends. I never took the chance, never kissed her. I never came back from Imperial Island. I told myself the lie over and over. Even so, my mind layered on top her teasing smile, how she rolled her eyes when I made up a particularly silly story, the way she leaned her head onto my shoulder and sighed after a long day. But I needed to believe the lie, because every time I thought about living the rest of my life without her, panic fluttered up my chest and wrapped itself around my throat. I swallowed. Did you look for her? Did you find any trace? Of course I looked, she said. I asked around. One of the fishermen said they saw a boat leave early that morning. Not from the docks, but from a nearby cove. It was small, dark, and had blue sails. It went east, that's all I know. It was the boat I'd seen the morning Amala had disappeared, rounding the edge of the island, the mist so thick I wasn't sure I'd seen it at all. In 4 years, this was the best lead I had. If I was quick, I might be able to catch it. One of the soldiers in the hall laughed, another groaned, and cards hit the table. Chairs scraped against the floor as they rose. It was a good game. A beam of sunlight warmed the back of my neck as they opened the door. Hey, you. You coming with us? The captain will bite your head off if you're late. No one answered, and I remembered the soldier's jacket I wore. He was talking to me. Danila seized my wrist, the one with the tattoo. Both her voice and her grip were intractable as tree roots. I've done you a favor, Jovis. Now I need a favor from you. Oh no. Favors? We didn't speak of favors. She talked over me and I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I have a nephew. He lives on a small isle just east of here. If I have it right, you'll be headed in that direction anyways. Take him before the ritual. Get him back to his parents. He's their only child. I'm not one of the shardless few. I don't smuggle children, I hissed. It's not ethical or profitable. I tried her grip and found her strength greater than mine. Do it. By the sound of the footsteps behind me, there was only one soldier. I could handle him. I could lie my way out of this. But after all these years, I still remember the trickle of blood from my scalp running down my neck, the cold touch of the chisel against my skin. The wound felt like fire. The emperor says that the tithing festival is a small price to pay for the safety of us all. It didn't feel like so small a price when it was your head bowed and your knees digging into the ground. I am hardened to the suffering of others. Another lie I told myself because I couldn't save everyone. I hadn't been able to even save my own brother. If I thought too much on all the suffering, all the people I couldn't help, I felt like I was drowning in the endless sea itself. I couldn't carry that weight. Mostly this worked, but not today. Today I thought of my mother, her hands on each side of my face. But what is the truth, Jovis? The truth was that someone had saved me. Sometimes one is enough. I'll take him, I said. I was a fool. So that is part of chapter 2 of my book. And so thank you very much for having me. And I hope that you all are staying safe and not too bored during this pandemic.